Welcome to Desert Water Agency's first workshop on its 2022 electoral division map updates. Many of you may be familiar with this process referred to as redistricting, but since Desert Water Agency is a district, we like to refer to the areas within our district as divisions to avoid confusion. So hopefully it achieves that. We're going to give it just another minute here for folks to arrive. It looks like so far we have about 15 people. And then Sochi, I'm going to ask that you keep an eye on the waiting room and let folks in as we go along here. All right, well, out of respect for everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we can welcome any latecomers as they join. So just wanted to briefly go over our agenda for today. This is not a Desert Water Agency special board meeting. This is a public workshop. So we don't have a formal agenda. This slide here is going to serve as our guide for today. I'm going to begin with some introductions. We're going to go over some brief housekeeping, just some Zoom basics and information about what we can hear and see and how to interact. We are going to look at elections by division as a practice, things that we have done in the past and the legal requirements for this process. We are going to hit on 2020 census results, as that is the driver for this go round in 2022. And then we're going to look at the current map, which was established in 2019, and the draft maps that we have developed so far for the 2022 process. We'll get into public comments and questions and answers, and then we'll talk more about how you can get involved. So for introductions, I want to make sure that everyone on our team here is recognized. We've got Mark Krause, our fearless leader and general manager. He'll give a wave. He is a pleasure to work with. I often refer to him as the best boss I've ever had. He's a fabulous champion for the community here in Palm Springs and was very engaged the last time we did this process in 2019. We've also got Steve Johnson, our assistant general manager, on the line. And we have on our outreach team, Sochi Pena and Vicki Pettick. If you have any questions or technical difficulties during the webinar, please email Vicki or call her. So Vicki's email address, and we'll put this in the chat, is Vicki, V-I-C-K-I, @DWA.org. And the phone number is 760-323-4971, extension 183. And then I would be remiss if I did not recognize that we've got some board members in the room as well. We've got Director Paul Ortega, who serves Division 4. And he is our newest member of the board, but has been a great addition and wonderful to work with. And we've got Pat Oygar on the line as well, who presently serves at large. And with that, I wanted to also mention that we've got some experts on the line from Best and Krieger. We've got our general counsel, Mike Riddell, and then we've got our election specialist, Stephanie D. Smith. Stephanie is the Director of Election Services for BB&K. She's got 34 years of election experience and happens to also have 34 redistricting clients in 2022. She's leading the way for the redistricting effort for the city of Palm Springs as well, so she may be a familiar face to those of you who have been involved in that process. So a little bit of housekeeping. A message popped up, I'm sure, when you entered, notifying you that you are being recorded. That is so that we can share this with folks who were unable to attend live. We have muted participants, and when we get to the public engagement component of this workshop, We'll ask that you raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask questions, make comments, give feedback. And in order to see the raise hand function, you're going to want to go in Zoom. Sometimes it's at the top of the screen and sometimes it's at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your arrow, a menu should pop up and you'll see a little reactions. It's a smiley face with a plus sign. If you hit that, you'll see the tool that allows you to raise and lower your hand. We would just ask that if you are done asking your question, if you've had your question addressed, maybe staff already spoke to something and you don't have the question any longer, that you go ahead and lower that. And then of course, if you have questions for us along the way, you're welcome to pop them in the chat. That's the little icon you see here, a dialog box. And then at the end, we'll have a brief poll just to make sure that we're doing this well so that the next time we do it, we can improve. And with that, I will hand it over to Stephanie Smith.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Redistricting is something that I believe is important to all of us. It is at the heart of our democracy, making sure that our elected officials are representative of our communities. And for district-based elections or division-based elections with a special district, the law states, the Elections Code of California states that any local agency that elects their members by division must redraw those division lines following the Decennial Census. So in 2020, we had the census and those results were released last fall. And by that, I mean the total number of our people, what the demographic breakdown was. And that's the data that we're required to use under the Elections Code to redraw division lines. And you might ask, well, why do we need to redraw the lines? Well, because under both federal and state law, division boundaries must be equal in population. And the first component to that comes right from the US Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment that eliminated the 3/5 compromise. And it stated that persons shall be counted as whole persons for the purpose of representation. And so it's important that all of our divisions be as close to equal in terms of population as possible. And then we have the Federal Voting Rights Act, which deals with the minority voice. So we look at the demographics, we look at the makeup of your voters and to see if it's possible to create divisions that would be classified as a majority minority voting district, which would allow minority voters the opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice. So once we've looked at those federal requirements, then we move to California requirements. And the California Voting Rights Act in many ways mirrors the Federal Voting Rights Act. Specifically, it states that division boundaries shall be equally populated, but it also says that we'll take into consideration things such as topography or geography, that districts would be what's the right word here? That they would be compact, that they would represent shapes that look normal to the average person. You shouldn't have to be an election expert to look at a map and say, oh, that makes sense to me. They used the interstate as a boundary. They used the wash as a boundary. Oh, there's a mountain here. That really should be in the same division. Those types of things. Those are taken into consideration when we draw the lines. Now, some of you may be asking, wow, didn't the Desert Water Agency just go through this? Actually, prior to 2019, Desert Water was an at-large district. In other words, each of the 5 board members represented the entire jurisdiction at large. They transitioned to division-based elections in 2019. Interestingly, when an agency transitions, they're required to use census data from the previous decennial census. Well, in 2019, unfortunately, that meant 2010 census data. So when they drew the lines, they were already drawing the lines with data that was 9 years old. So even though you just transitioned, it was with data that was from over 10 years ago now. And it's important that we use the 2020 census data to draw lines that are equally populated today. So next slide, please. So let's take a look at what those census results are. Essentially, in 2010, the agency had almost 90,000 people, but in 2020, they're up to 96.5. So a tremendous growth spurt there. It was an 8% growth overall. And the divisions themselves, of course, are more populated, whereas in 2010, they were about 17,863. And in 2020, almost 2,000, about 1,600 more at 19,317. And that's per division. So there was very little growth in the city of Palm Springs. However, the larger growth area occurred in Desert Hot Springs, and almost a 25% growth over decade over decade. So for those of you obviously are familiar with the jurisdiction, that makes sense, right? That's where all the development occurred, and that's where a lot of new housing happened. Palm Springs is a fairly established community, so there wasn't a lot of new residential development. So the population didn't shift very much in those division areas. So let's take a quick look at our current map. So this is what the map looks like at the moment. And notice I mentioned, it's interesting that, you look at them and they don't look like they're the same in size, right? I talked about divisions needing to be compact, but they also need to be population balanced. And that area up there to the north and the east, that would be Division 2. It's a much smaller jurisdiction than Division 4, which is down towards the south and the west. That's because of the population. The population in the Desert Hot Springs area is much greater than kind of the hillside area of Palm Springs. So even though they are not the same in terms of geographic space, they are fairly close in terms of population. And this is what you'll see going forward as we look at draft maps. They don't have to be the same in geographic area. They need to be the same in terms of population. So areas that are more densely populated are going to be smaller geographies than areas that are less populated. So let's take a look at some draft maps that we've prepared. Now, our demographers have drawn 2 map options just to get the conversation started. Doesn't mean that these are the only maps that'll be considered, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's look at the draft maps. So on this map, the black lines actually represent the existing divisions. So you're able to compare the existing boundaries with the proposed boundaries. But in general, the makeup of this draft option 1, it looks similar to in the Division 4, that long section that reaches up towards the hills there in South Palm Springs. But the rest of the divisions seem to have changed just a little tiny bit, particularly with relationship to the Desert Hot Springs area. And if you'll recall, when I was talking about the 2020 census data, that was the area that saw the most population growth. So it makes sense that those division boundaries will need to be adjusted the most. So in this particular map, why don't you put the existing boundaries on top of that real quick, just so you can see. So as you can see, the major change is in that area that is to the north of I-10, in that general area, where you can see the change in the boundary lines. And again, that was to create equally populated districts. Not so much change on the other side of the interstate because that population remained fairly stable. So let's look at map option 2. So map option 2 is a slightly different configuration, particularly with the area that is actually on both sides of the interstate. The only district that shares a lot of the same characteristics is District 1, which is the area that is to the far west of the jurisdiction's boundaries. It does straddle both sides of the freeway. And whereas I mentioned that a lot of times we'll use natural barriers to create lines such as highways, the wash, mountain range. We also have that little stickler of a situation where there has to be population balanced, and there just isn't enough population on one side of the interstate or the other to create that district without them being disproportionately populated. And so that's why one of your divisions must straddle I-10. If you want to compare them together, then you can just click on both them and you can see the changes. It gets a little busy, the map gets a little busy, but I believe that the district is going to be posting this particular link on their redistricting page so people can look at the map options themselves and spend a little bit more time looking at the nuances of the districts. You also have a layer for Palm Springs. Palm Springs has a dedicated neighborhood map, their neighborhoods of interest, things like the Movie Colony area or Gene Autry Ranch. And so you're able to turn that layer on and see that the best efforts were designed to keep whole neighborhoods within the same division. Now, they're not all in the same division because Palm Springs is populated to the extent that it has to be multiple divisions. We can't put all of Palm Springs in one division. However, we tried to keep whole neighborhoods as designated by the city of Palm Springs together in the same division. And that's
another important thing to note here, this is Ashley chiming in, is that the divisions that presently have seats that are elected directly are divisions 4, which is where my cursor is now, the large division, and division 5, the southeastern division. So Director Paul Ortega represents Division 4 and Director Kristen Bloomer represents Division 5. The remainder of our board is elected at large, and they will be up for re-election in 2022. And presumably this northern area is what we're talking about for that 2022 election.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, some people might ask why that is, and because when agencies transition to district-based or division-based elections, it's important that you maintain. No sitting officer can lose their seat when you move to divisions. So those officers have to serve out their terms. Those at-large directors who were elected in 2018 and they're on the ballot in 2022, they serve out the remainder of their 4-year term. So the transition to division-based elections is really a 2-election process. So 2 districts were on the ballot in 2020, and then the remaining 3 will be on the ballot in 2022.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I thought that was really helpful information. And we also placed the link to the Google map that we were working with that had the existing divisions and also the 2 drafts that have been developed so far in the chat. It's worth noting that the last time we went through this process, there were 6 maps before the one that was selected. And some of the people in the Zoom room today were actually pretty influential in determining those final maps. We took a lot of community feedback and altered map drafts along the way. So just because we have 2 that we've shown you today, those haven't gone before our board of directors for review or approval yet. And we don't anticipate they will for some time. So we'll talk a little bit more about the process later, but we wanted to, early enough in the meeting here, give folks an opportunity to provide any comments or suggestions on the maps they've seen, on the communities of interest, and any questions or comments about the process. We do ask that you keep your comments to about 3 minutes time. And please go ahead and raise your hand and we can unmute. So we're going to start out with Paul. I've unmuted you.
Let's see, I think I unmuted myself too. Can
Perfect.
You hear me, Ashley? Great.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just a member of the community. I happen to be a part of leadership for the Upper West Side Neighborhood Organization in Palm Springs. And despite having been involved in all the redistricting meetings for Palm Springs, I don't know how I managed to miss meeting Stephanie. So there's a large learning curve I'm finding when it comes to water and the divisions. I keep wanting to call them districts, so sorry if I make that mistake. What I'm trying to learn is, do the divisions all have elected representatives, or are some selected some other way, or is there a transition going to that? And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the relationship between Mission Springs Water District and Desert Water Agency. And even as I look at the map, I can see they overlap. Could you explain a little bit of that? And I will take my hand down. Thank you.
Wonderful.
So Ashley, I'll have you address the water issue.
Perfect.
However, I can speak to how the board members are elected. As the transition process requires that you elect some by district at one election and then the remainder by district at the other election. But they are all elected by the members of the residents, the voters in the jurisdiction for Desert Water. So in 2020, we had directors from, I believe it was 1 and 2?
4 and 5.
4 and 5, that's right, correct. 4 and 5 were elected by district. The remaining officers, the remaining board members were elected at large, meaning they were elected by people who lived throughout the entire agency. And so at the end of their current terms, which is in 2022, they will then have the opportunity to run for a district seat, because at that point, all 5 seats will be elected by district. Currently, you have 2 that are elected by district division and 3 that are elected at large. But come November, you will have all 5 board members elected by division.
And then with regard to your question about the relationship between Desert Water Agency and Mission Springs Water District, Desert Water Agency covers a 325 square mile area. In part of that area, including the city of Palm Springs, parts of Cathedral City, we provide retail water service. So when you turn the tap on, that's water that our distribution system delivers to your home. In the Desert Hot Springs area, Mission Springs Water District provides that domestic water service, but they have a relationship with Desert Water Agency because the water that they pump from underneath the ground is replenishment water that Desert Water Agency has contracts to procure. So we have water that we're able to import. We have rights to water in the Sierra Nevada. By a complex mechanism, we end up getting water here in the desert, and we put that water into ponds and it soaks underground. And then Mission Springs Water District has wells that they use to pump that water out and deliver it to homes. It's a little bit complicated. If you have further questions on that, I'll throw my email in the chat, and anyone who wants more information on that specific issue, feel free to shoot me an email. And with that, we're going to go to our next question here. So if you could please raise your hand if you have any more questions or comments. Oh, we've got another one for Paul, so I'll let you go at it again.
Thanks so much. So it looks like the process for the district elections are kind of happening the same way they did in Palm Springs when Lisa and Christy were at large, and they are now part of a district. And this is happening here now. Mission Springs also has elections. How are those elections different from Desert Water Agency? As you can see, I'm not doing well on this learning curve because I think you kind of tried to address that.
Oh, that's okay. So and again, it's very complicated. So Mission Springs Water District, they are a county water district. They have their own elections and their own divisions that they established recently as well. So they will be running their elections for their own board of directors. And we have a separate board of directors. We have 5 members who represent Desert Water Agency, including the area that overlies Mission Springs Water District. So it is a little complicated. It's kind of like having 2 layers of government. There are some voters within our jurisdiction that will vote for both a Desert Water Agency seat and for a Mission Springs Water District seat. So anyone who, think about it like 2 concentric circles, anyone who lives in the area that's covered by both will end up being able to vote for both. And presently, our directors that are elected at large were elected by the entire jurisdiction, inclusive of the folks in Desert Hot Springs. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, if not, feel free to give me a call or email me and we can talk more about that. I'm going to go ahead and we have another hand up here, Mr. Don Barrett.
And I have to remember how to unmute also, even though I run Zoom meetings. Actually, I'm just continuing what Paul said. So I wanted to make sure that Desert Water Agency in the 2022 election is electing 3 people or all 5?
3 people.
3 people. And those are in those districts that are on the north side predominantly. Probably not in Palm Springs. It doesn't look like it covers Palm Springs at all. It looks like it's, well, it covers North Palm Springs and Desert Hot Springs.
Yep. That's valid. You've got 2 districts in Desert Hot Springs. I think both of them cover some of incorporated Desert Hot Springs, and then the rest are county areas. And then there is 1 division that covers the northern part of Palm Springs, and then part of the unincorporated area north of the freeway as well. But you know,
Right.
those are in the current and draft maps. That's not to say that you couldn't submit a map that had a little bit of a different layout. So
Yeah.
please feel free to get creative. We're going to talk next about a mapping tool that we have available to residents and community members and any interested parties to develop.
Yeah, like Paul, I was involved in the Palm Springs district and didn't really follow closely on what happened up on this. These are so large that I'm not sure I see any real problems with them. I mean, I liked option 2 better than 1, but other than that.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll make a note of that. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mr. Crawford.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Ashley. Hi, everyone. Just want to ask a little bit about the mapping tool. As the other previous speakers, I live in Palm Springs in the Desert Highland Gateway Estates neighborhood, was pretty involved in the mapping process with Palm Springs and the last Desert Water Agency one. But I was trying to work the mapping tool, and it's a little difficult when I go to fill in some of the areas with the boundaries on the map. There's the map goes to different areas and it doesn't quite stay within those precincts or blocks. So that's probably more something for BB&K and Stephanie, the consultant. But I just wanted to make you guys aware of there's a little issue, and I've been also playing with the Palm Springs tool, and it doesn't seem to have the same issue that when you click and try to add different blocks and precincts, that it kind of goes out of the boundary lines.
So Stephanie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, and I'll take a look at that. I'm not, and maybe we can talk offline too, Mr. Crawford. My contact information is available on the mapping instructions, and both for Palm Springs and the Desert Water Agency. You'll notice that my email is the one that's on those instruction sheets. I'm not exactly sure that I understand, but I think that when you're trying to add precincts or blocks, somehow you're able to add blocks that are outside the jurisdictional boundaries. That might be what you're trying to say. But I'd be happy to, first of all, I'll take a look at the tool after this is over and make sure it's working properly. But second of all, we could always set up a time where you and I can meet, and we could probably do it on Zoom, and we can try and troubleshoot what's happening. If you're working with the tool and it's working okay for you in Palm Springs, it should be working exactly the same for Desert Water, but we'll take a look at that.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Mr. Crawford. You know, we want to make sure that that is a functional tool. You know, it's not something we had the last time around when we developed these maps. So it's hopefully something that you all enjoy having access to and have been able to play with a little bit. It's been available on our site for a little over a week now. So, and it will remain up. We don't have any intention of taking it down anytime soon. So I'm going to look to the participant list one last time for any raised hands for questions or comments. Oh, we've got another one from Paul. Go for it, sir.
Sorry, I'm so talkative. One of the other questions is regarding qualifications for the directors of their seats. I would guess, just as in the Palm Springs elections, a residency requirement exists. And I was wondering if there are or have been exemptions from that, because there are some who have been concerned about that. Could you speak to those requirements? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. A lot of people are interested in how our elected officials are actually elected. The only qualification to serve as a board member for Desert Water is that you are a registered voter within the division you seek to represent. So if you live in the boundaries of Division 1 and you are a registered voter in Division 1, you are qualified to run for the office of board of directors from Division 1. That is the only qualification, is that you are a registered voter within the division you seek to represent. Now, some people inquire about the rules to be a registered voter. In California, there is not a requirement that you register to vote, that you have to live in any one place 50.1% of the time in order to register to vote there. You can only be registered to vote in one location within the state, but there's no requirement that you live there the majority of your time. You just have to be a registered voter. So a person could have multiple homes. And I know in the desert, a lot of people have vacation homes. People could have multiple homes throughout the state, but they can only be registered to vote in one location. And it must be what they consider their domicile in the area that they choose to call their home. And that's where they're registered to vote. So as long as you're a registered voter in the division you seek to represent, you are qualified to run for the board of directors.
Thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, just to wrap that up, Paul, I think the second part of your question was whether there have been any exemptions to that. And yeah, there have not been.
Yeah, it would be illegal to have exemptions to that.
All right. Any other questions here before we move on? And don't feel like this is your only opportunity to engage or ask questions or submit comments. You know, this is just one step in the process, and we've got quite a few steps to go before we wrap this up. So Paul, we're going to give you one last take at the mic here. Let me unmute you.
Okay. Yeah. Last question. Thank you for addressing them. So the board of directors, is it bigger than how am I asking this? So in Palm Springs, city council meets, we've got a dais of 5 city council members. In the Desert Water Agency's board of directors, I guess it is, are they only the elected officials, or are there additional members who sit on the board? And how is that composed if that does exist? I will mute and stop asking questions.
No worries. And if more come up, that's fine. So we only have our 5 elected officials. That's the only people who the board is composed of. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. All right. We are going to move on. I see a new hand raised from Ms. Stephanie Martin. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you, Ashley and Stephanie. All right, I'm a Stephanie too, and Stephanie's and Ashley's are wonderful. Okay, my question is kind of a little maybe out there or maybe not. Okay, what is the percentage of the mineral aquifer water that is cut with the Colorado River water in District 3 specifically? Or where can I find that, or proposed District 3, I don't know, but where can I find that information specifically? I'm still trying to learn about the water and the aquifers in general around here. So I thought y'all would be a good place to start and asking.
Absolutely. So we don't have that type of information based on division. So that's going to be a larger question, but I would point you to, we just completed some really critical planning documents for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And I will provide a link in the chat for anyone who is interested in pursuing those documents. They have a huge, huge wealth of information, and they are very, very informative. And additionally, there's a program, unfortunately, the application period just closed, called Water Counts Academy. And anyone who's interested in learning more about water in the Coachella Valley, it's a great resource. So even though the application period has closed for this year, if you put your name on the interest list, they'll put you on like a waiting list and reach out to you the next time they're accepting applications. So I'm going to throw both of those items in the chat now. And then Stephanie, I see your hand is still raised. Did you have anything further?
Yes, actually, I had kind of like a follow-up question to that. It reminded me that the state of California drought grants are kind of where are we specifically on that? Did we get to toss our hat in the ring, as it were?
We did, and it looks like we will be getting some funding from that, but it hasn't been finalized yet, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I am excited, and I do think we will see some exciting incentive programs and maybe a little different approach than we've taken in the past. So we'll be making an announcement about that. If you would like to follow us on social media or check back to Desert Water Agency's website, we should have an update on that probably in about 2 months' time. Okay, I'm looking for any last raised hands here before we move on. And seeing none, we will move forward here. All right, so we are going to go ahead and play. For those of you who are interested, we have a short video here on how to use the mapping tool. If I could see a show of hands on how many people want to use this mapping tool, we can always just put a link to it in the chat. But if I have enough people interested on the phone line, we can play the video here and now for everybody. It's a little bit of step by step. So I don't want to get into the nitty gritty if we don't have interest in hearing about it. So I'll give everyone another minute or two, or maybe just a minute here to raise your hand if you want to see this mapping video now. And it looks like there may not be a ton of interest in that. So what I'm going to ask, this video is posted on our website. You can access it anytime you'd like, and it may be more helpful to do it on your own so that you can kind of step by step watch the video and then move along with it in this mapping tool that we have available. But it's a very helpful, handy mapping tool that allows you to propose your own district or your own division outline for Desert Water Agency. And it has population tools because, as Stephanie can tell you, the really challenging part here is, you know, if the idea is, oh, we want to move this neighborhood over to this division instead of that division, you know, then you almost have to rebalance everything because the population, you have to keep approximately equal. So we're looking for populations that are at or close to 19,317. And if you have any problems using this tool, as Stephanie mentioned, her email is available on our website. Our email is available on the website, and it will be available on the next slide. So we just want to have that information out. So Sochi, if you could go ahead and put the link to the mapping tool and also the link to our divisions page in the chat, that would be great. And then we did get a question in the chat about where the current proposed maps came from. Those were maps that our demographer developed, just looking at the way the population has changed since 2010, when which is the set of data that are most recent map was built on. It was built in 2019, but we only had the 2010 census data to use at the time. And looking at the 2020 census data, the demographer came up with a couple options on, what we could do in certain areas. So needless to say, there will be more map versions, maybe more than one or two. So if you have any feedback or want to see something done differently, please submit feedback. And it doesn't have to be with this mapping tool, because it is very complicated. Even for someone who's tech savvy, I struggled with it a bit. So if you find yourself hitting your head against a wall, know you're in good company, and also know that you can just email us and say, hey, I really like this about Division 1, but I'm hoping you can, add this neighborhood and take out that neighborhood. Or, I'd like to see you, try something more like X, Y, or Z. And then we can give that feedback to the demographers, and they can take another stab at it. So we'll go ahead and move on. So the process, everything you see in gray here is where we've been or where we are. So we had a public hearing in September of 2021 to formally kick off this process. We've been doing public outreach. We've tried to get the word out about these sessions. We put the draft maps on our website, and then we've held the workshop today. We've got another one on February 9th in the evening for those who have a traditional work day that couldn't make it on their lunch today. We will have board meeting updates at our board meetings between now and the final adoption. We will need all feedback at or before the public hearing, which is currently scheduled for March 15th. So get us your feedback. You don't have to feel too rushed because you have some time. If you are going to submit a map, sooner is probably better. And then we do have that public hearing scheduled on March 15th. You're welcome to give testimony at the public hearing, to request changes or ideas or what have you at that meeting. And then we are required by California law to adopt a map by April 17th. And then that map will be used in the 2020 election in November. And then our new board members will be installed in December of 2022. So how can you get involved? You can check out our website, which is also in the chat, dwa.org/divisions. You'll find an FAQ, information, the draft maps, the mapping tool, the video on how to use the mapping tool, ways to contact us, which are also included here and in the chat. You can send your questions and feedback to us directly via email. You can call if you'd like as well, and we can try to get those comments down as best as possible to convey to our demographer. You can submit a map using the mapping tool, or even if you want to sketch one out, that's, we welcome any and all feedback. And then you can also attend the next workshop on February 9th. We'll also be recording that workshop as well. So if you hope to see that workshop, but you're not able to make it, we will have a recording available on our website. You can attend any board meeting anytime, but namely between now and when we have this public hearing slated for March 15th. And you can make public comments at any board meeting. You can consider a run for office, and certainly you can vote in November if you are a registered voter within the Desert Water Agency jurisdiction. So that's a lot of ways to stay plugged in. Also, always give a shout out for social media. We post a lot of information about what we're doing in terms of elections, but also what we're doing on conservation, on water management planning, on all sorts of things. So stay plugged in, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. We've got 18 people on the line here talking about this, which is fantastic. And hopefully we'll catch even more of these people that watch the recording and come to the next workshop. So with that, we'll go ahead and do a quick poll here and get your feedback before closing out. All right, we've got 3 questions for you. Question number 1, do you plan to draw your own map? Yes, no, or maybe. Question number 2, do you intend to provide comments on the maps you saw today? Yes, no, or maybe. And then number 3, was this workshop helpful? And if you have any specific feedback on something we could do differently for the workshop, please feel free to share it. We want to make sure that every time we're getting people in the community what they want to see. So we'll give you another minute or 2 here to finish the poll, and then you're welcome to jump off the line if you're ready to go, or stick around and see the poll results if you're interested. So I'm going to go ahead, and we've got most of the people here participated in the poll, and I'm going to share our results so you can see. So it seems like about half the people intend to draw their own map. That's great. I'm glad we have that tool. And then yes, comments on the maps as well. And then the workshop, everyone thought it was helpful. Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think your expertise here really, really helped.
Well, thank you for putting it together. I think it's something that everyone is interested in. It's happening all around us at the county level, at the state level, at our city levels. And so I'm just so happy that so many people came out and wanted to learn about Desert Water's efforts.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again. And we'll go ahead and let folks sign off. And if you have any lingering questions and you want to stick around, feel free to do that. We'll stick around for the next couple minutes here. Oh, it looks like Paul, you have a question.
I do. Thanks so much. I'm really pleased to see so much interest in drawing their maps. And I was wondering, what have been the biggest challenges that you have been dealing with as you've been trying to draw these new maps, so that if we're going to look at drawing a map, we can kind of focus on where the challenges have been?
You know, Paul, that's a good question. We don't look at them so much as challenges as pieces to a puzzle. And we try and, of course, first and foremost, have to balance the population, because that's a federal and a state requirement, that the divisions be equally populated to the extent practicable. But then the next little puzzle is we're confined to census blocks, not the census precincts on the tool, but the census blocks, which is the lowest, the smallest unit of measurement. We cannot split census blocks. And so we have to, this whole neighborhood would be great to keep together, but the census blocks take us into another neighborhood. So a little piece of that neighborhood's going to have to be outside, things like that. That's a little bit of a challenge. You have to keep your census blocks in the same division. And then the last thing I think is that the census blocks do not necessarily respect the jurisdictional boundaries of Desert Water. The census blocks are established by the U.S. Census Bureau, and whereas they do respect the boundaries for municipalities, so the cities all stay together within census blocks, the special districts, they recognize, you know, special districts cover multiple jurisdictions. They're not stuck with just one municipal boundary. And so unfortunately, there could be census blocks that go beyond the agency's boundaries. And that gets to be a challenge, because we have to only include the population that lives in the agency boundary, but the census block might go beyond that. So when you look at some of the draft maps, sometimes you might see a census block that bleeds over. However, just know that the GIS file stops at the border. And so for persons drawing the map on the mapping tool, it's not quite as easy. And so that's why I always like to say they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be exact. Just give us a general idea of what neighborhoods, what areas you'd like to see in which division, and we can fine tune it on our end to make sure that it matches up with the jurisdictional boundaries.
And then in Palm Springs, you also have the added layer of the organized neighborhoods to contend with. So just so you know, Paul, it's a priority for Desert Water Agency based on the feedback we received during the last cycle to keep the neighborhoods intact. We don't want one neighborhood to be half in one division and half in another if we can help it. All right, thank you for all of your good questions today. Paul. Really appreciate it. And then I see we've got Council Member Russell Betts from Desert Hot Springs. I'm going to unmute you here.
Great, thank you. I just had a quick question. I know with the cities, there's not much latitude on how the lines can be drawn, but with some of the special districts, there is some accommodation for incumbents that would be running in an upcoming election. Actually, I'm asking, is that true? I know at Mission Springs Water District, when they drew the lines, they took what should look like would have been a straight line, had it jog over one block, go up another block, and then back down to accommodate a board member. Does Desert Water Agency have that kind of latitude to avoid the sticky wickets of the incumbents?
Great question, Mr. Betts. Great question. There is a traditional redistricting principle, and we have federal law, state law, and then we have traditional principles that have been developed through multiple cases winding their way through the federal courts, and where decisions had been made one way or another on things. And one of those principles is continuity of office and respecting the choice of voters. The voters have elected the current board members, so they have made a choice to elect those board members. And so we can consider incumbency when we look at maps. However, you have to take care of the federal and the state requirements first. And those requirements that your divisions be compact, that they respect topography and geography. You couldn't create a crazy looking map, you know, that might look like a spider web or a pterodactyl or a blood splatter on a crime scene. Those are all words that federal judges have used to describe maps that they found to be non-compliant. You would want maps that look very much like Desert Water's current map, where they're blocks, they're blocky. The only jigs and jags that you have are a result of the jurisdictional boundaries not being straight lines, right? And so that's what you strive for. If you can meet the criteria that is found in federal and state law and accommodate the current boundaries of existing officers, then yes, you can certainly draw a map that looks that way. But let me give you an example of why that doesn't work sometimes. When elected officials are done at large, you could have all 5 board members that live in the same neighborhood, theoretically, right? They might all live in the same area. Well, when you draw the division lines, you have to make them population balanced, so that's one of the purposes of vote by division, so that every area has a voice. And so if they all lived, for example, in the same neighborhood, perhaps in Palm Springs or perhaps in Desert Hot Springs, when you draw lines, multiple board members are going to be in the same division. So that does happen sometimes during the transition process. Can't speak to the process that Mission Water went through and where their board members live, but traditionally you focus on federal and state requirements, and then once those have been satisfied, you can look at board member residency.
Yeah, wow, great explanation. Thank you. It's very clear, very helpful.
Thank you, Councilmember Betts, for attending the workshop, and thanks to everyone who stuck around on the line. Really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and close out here. Again, our email information and website are both on the screen and in the chat. And hope to see some of you back on February 9th, and if not, at our planned adoption hearing on March 15th. Thank you, everyone, and stay well.